Wonderful. Thank you for joining us. I'm Susanna Lewis. I am the co-chair of Thriving Youth Darien, and I'm the director of community relations at Silver Hill Hospital. We're glad to have you joining us tonight as we share the results of the 2023 Darien Youth Survey. So just sort of quick, it's a simple agenda. I'm going to just talk a very little bit about Thriving Youth Darien, just to orient everybody to the coalition. Georgette Harrison is then going to talk a little bit about the history of the survey and run us through sort of the high points of the data from this year. And then we have a wonderful panel of professionals put together who will primarily be here to answer your questions. So we have one question that we will ask to each of them to respond to, and other than that, it will be open floor for you all. So thank you for joining us. Oh, okay, I see. Figuring I've got a couple slides on here. Some thank yous that we would like to sort of say, offer at the get-go. As in our previous survey years, this has been an amazing partnership with the Darien Public Schools. They have been just amazingly supportive and collaborative in getting this effort off the ground each round, and we wouldn't be able to get the quality and amount of data that we can collect without that partnership. So that has been so appreciated. The students and parents who took the survey and shared their information with us, we really appreciate that. And then our survey committee co-chairs, Amy Daniels and Georgette Harrison, have on the coalition rather than the staff side, and in a time when we did not have a program director in place, have really worked very hard to go through all the data, pull it together with the support of our evaluator, Nina Chanana. So it's been a real team effort, and want to thank everybody who has gotten us to this point tonight. So a little bit about Thriving Youth Darien. We are a volunteer coalition that convenes local organizations to promote and empower positive youth development and mental health with the goal of reducing teen substance use. We were founded in 2008 and currently comprise leaders from 35 youth-serving organizations in town that cross 12 different organizational sectors. We're lucky to have such a wide range of experience and expertise at the table, and from the schools to the police department, healthcare and mental health professionals, elected town officials, clergy. So it's really it's a diverse group. We have been grant funded since 2000 or ninth year of grant funding this year, but in 2021, the CDC awarded us a $125,000 a year grant to continue our prevention efforts. So we are in the midst of that grant. It's the Drug Free Communities Grant, and that is with that grant taking effect, we now are required to survey every 2 years. So we had been surveying every 3 years, but we'll have those data points more frequently with this funding. And the Community Fund of Darien is our fiscal agent for any grant funding we receive, because we are not our own 501c3. So they are part of our coalition as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Georgette now, and I'll just, many of you know her. She's done amazing work in the schools in the last couple of years here, but I'll give you a brief bio. Georgette Harrison is the Director of Clinical and Community Partnerships at the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut, an affiliate of Community Health Centers, Inc. She's a licensed professional counselor in the states of Connecticut and New York, and maintains a private practice in New Canaan. She's a former co-chair of Thriving Youth Darien, and as I mentioned, has been one of our survey co-chairs this year. So, Georgette.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about what's new this year for the survey. Now, this was first completed in 2008 in an effort to really understand and recognize what are the substance use patterns and mental health patterns that we're seeing throughout the Darien youth, with really the focus on trying to change and help every single teenager thrive. Now, since the beginning, the Darien Public Schools has been an amazing partner, as Susanna said. And this year, we were able to survey 6th through 12th graders. All surveys were administered anonymously, and every parent had the option to opt out. They could see the questions before the survey was administered and then opt out if they so wished. And really, the sole purpose of the survey is to gather information about these patterns so that we can take a look at what the risk and protective factors are, and so that we can help convene as a community to have an organized response, and then also to inform any programming. And, you know, given that about 24% of the Darien population is 19 years old or younger, it really makes sense to invest as much as we can as possible in our children. So what's new this year? The first thing is that we selected questions from the Regional Youth Survey Question Data Bank, which is also used by nearby towns that are conducting similar surveys. So this allows us to draw local and regional comparisons. And we also asked additional demographic information this year that lines up with the U.S. Census Bureau, but it also it included questions such as gender identity and the student self-identified as being part of the LGBTQ plus community. And this was done in an effort to better interpret data and also understand how we can best support all of our students. Teens had the option to skip any question throughout the survey except for grade. We also added more questions about protective factors such as how teens were spending their time, their knowledge about mental health and substance use resources, and their sense of connectedness with others. And we also added new questions about risk factors such as gambling, social media use, disordered eating, suicide, and self-harm. Now, overall, we were really pleased with the response rates. It was around 79%. The ideal is to get as close to 80% as possible. Our 11th and 12th graders had the lowest response rates, but these were actually higher than nearby towns, so we were still really happy about those response rates. Now, moving forward, I'm going to be referring to teens, but when I say teens, I'm actually talking about our 6th through 12th graders, so tweens and teens. Now, most of the students who responded to the survey identified as white, with Latinx, multiracial, Asian or Asian American, Black, Native Hawaiian, and American Indian represented in smaller numbers. Close to 95% of the teens identified as either male or female, with a pretty even distribution, and about 1.5% of students identified as either non-binary or something else. And a little over 9% of teens identified as being part of the LGBTQ plus community. Now, this is in line with the data from the Williams Institute, which conducts independent research on sexual orientation and gender identity law and public policy. And according to their data, 9.5% of youth ages 13 to 17 identify as being part of the LGBTQ plus community nationwide. So before we get started on some of the data, I wanted to go through resilience, right? Simply put, resilience is really just being able to end up with a good outcome despite adversity. So if we take a look at this visual from the Center of the Developing Child from Harvard University, what you have to take into consideration is that each individual has both risk and protective factors, right? Risk factors are things like bumps on the road, things like having experienced trauma or living in an unsafe environment. Now, the bumps on the road increase the chances that you're going to have a negative outcome. Protective factors are the things that reduce the impact that adversity can have on a person. So things like having a trusted adult, feeling safe and valued in your community are really great protective factors. Now, every person's scale is going to look different and have different factors on each side of it. Now, the survey is intended to help us better understand what these factors are and to really think about how do we support our teens so that they can all thrive despite adversity, despite whatever may be on their scale. Now, the most important part to remember is that resilience is not something you either have or you don't have. It's not something that you are, quote unquote, born with or not born with. Instead, it is something that gets built over time, over every single interaction that the child has with their environment. So there are some well-known individual protective factors that we asked about and where Darien teens are doing really well. So for example, about 70% are engaged in productive activities such as clubs, community service, sports. around 83% are developing a sense of purpose in their life. About 80% of them were connected to a trusted adult. And what's really striking about this particular data point is that back in 2021, this number was 68%. So we went from 68% to 80% in terms of number of teens that reported having a trusted adult in their life. So the two most sort of frequently cited people that were the trusted adult in their life was either the parent of a friend or a relative, such as a grandparent. So if you really think about it, that you can all serve not just as protective factors for your own children, but you're also serving as protective factors for your children's friends. And then 71% of them know where to get help if they're struggling with a mental health issue, and 52% know where to go for help if they are having an issue with substance misuse or a friend. Now, these are some protective factors at the community level. About 90% of them reported high levels of love, support, and acceptance from their family. 75% of them reported that their peers in school cared for them. 84% felt safe in school. And 87% of them reported feeling safe in the community. Now, for most teens who responded to the survey, they feel valued, they feel respected and accepted by the people around them, and they feel safe as they move about in their lives. Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, because I want to note that while this is a community strength, this is not every teen's experience. So let's talk about the risk factors. Now, there are some well-known risk factors that increase a person's likelihood to end up with a bad outcome. So this is what our teens shared in the survey. About 35% felt worse about themselves due to social media. They felt left out. About 30% of them lost sleep due to gaming. 22% engaged in gambling activities, such as online and sports betting and fantasy sports leagues. And now we're going to get into the sort of the majority of the presentation where we're talking about substance use and mental health concerns. So like 2 years ago, we'll be walking you through some common myths and misconceptions about substance use and mental health, and then discuss what the data is actually showing us. The first is that drinking is just part of the normative teen experience, particularly in high school. And since this is the case, teens in pretty much every town will drink to the same degree. The reality is that drinking doesn't need to be a part of the teen experience. In fact, the data suggests that every town has different norms around teen drinking. So let's take a look at the Darien teen alcohol use in the past 30 days. As you can see, there was none reported in the 6th grade, and then we begin to see some reports in the 7th and 8th grade. We see a particularly big jump as teens enter high school, and then again in the senior year. Now, we can think about these as really sensitive or critical periods where we can reinforce messages about what the family norms are about teen drinking and disapproval of teen drinking. Let's also take a look at what the past 30-day alcohol use rates have been over the years, though. So we didn't include 6th graders in this particular graph because this is the first time that we surveyed 6th graders, so we didn't have anything to compare it to. But as you can see, almost all grades saw an increase in alcohol use between 2021 and 2023. Now, at the national level, we hypothesized that this was likely to happen because the lower rates of alcohol use in 2021 we assumed were due in part due to social distancing guidelines and just less opportunities for drinking. Now, what I want to call your attention to are the differences between 2018 and 2023. And you can see that alcohol rates have actually gone down between those two years. And we should be really, really proud of our teens because there has been that marked decrease in alcohol use between now and then. So what are we seeing in other towns in our region? So as you can see, Darien has fairly similar alcohol use rates when compared to Fairfield, Greenwich, and Stratford. And Norwalk has lower rates, but we do want to note that Norwalk used a slightly different survey as well. However, when we just take a look at the seniors, we see that their alcohol use rate is significantly higher than those in other towns. So we hope that this dispels the myth that these drinking rates in particular, especially at the 12th grade, is just part of the normative teen experience. As you can see, as a town, we can think about what might be driving these numbers and try to address it, both at the family level, but also at the community level. We also asked teens to share their use of other substances in the past 30 days. Marijuana, vaping, nicotine, and prescription drug use were all down from 2018. And we were all really happy to see that trend. And these were all trends that we also saw at the state level. Bless you. So, for the teens who are drinking, these are the top 3 reasons for doing so: to have fun, peer pressure, and because alcohol is readily available. Now, notably, the older the teen was, the more likely they were to say that they were drinking in order to have fun. They were also more likely to say that peer pressure was the reason they were drinking. So this implies 2 things. One is that at the family level, we can think about how do we arm our teens with more strategies, more tools to counteract peer pressure, even as they get older. Peer pressure is not just a thing in middle school, right? At the community level, we need to think about how to set the stage for activities that don't require the use of alcohol and how we can limit access to alcohol. We also saw that the top 3 places where they were drinking are at parties, with friends in a home, and to a lesser extent, at home with their parents present. Now, as parents, we can all think about how we can influence these 3 settings. For example, how do we impact access? Because 58% of teens said that alcohol would be actually quite easy to get. That included almost half of our middle schoolers, who said that they felt that alcohol would be really easy to get. So again, if we consider that alcohol is readily accessible, is the top 3rd reason why teens say they're drinking, access to alcohol seems like a really easy target for change. So the next myth is that, the one where as parents we tell ourselves that there is really nothing we can do about it, that our teens just stopped listening years ago, and teens are just going to do what teens are going to do, right? 2 years ago, we presented data that showed that parents were actually quite influential in a teen's decision not to drink. And we have even more data this year to support that. Now let's take a look at the middle schoolers and high schoolers who are choosing not to drink. While their reasons kind of varied between middle school and high school, I want to point out that at the high school level, parents are strict is one of the top 3 reasons. While hanging out with friends who also don't drink made a difference, we don't want you to underestimate your value and your importance as a parent. It is important for you to talk to your teen about what you think about teen drinking and express disapproval of teen drinking because it is not falling on deaf ears. And take a look at the other top reason. I just don't want to, right? Now, one could make the argument that not wanting to drink has a lot to do with the messages about drinking that they have received growing up and that they have internalized over the years. Now, if that information doesn't persuade you that your teens are listening when you tell them what you think about teen drinking, we hope this will. Teens who report that they don't believe that their parents disapprove of them drinking were 9 times more likely to drink on the weekends. So earlier we had talked about how, between 2018 and 2023, we had started to move the needle in the right direction, right? Now here's more data to support that. The percentage of teens who thought underage drinking was no big deal decreased from 40 to 30% this year. Their perception that their friend group would disapprove of them drinking increased from 62 to 82%. And their perception that their parents disapproved increased from 86 to 92%. And even though we just mentioned that over half of our teens believe that alcohol would be easy to get, there's still a decrease compared to that perception in 2018. The other myth that we wish to debunk tonight is that drinking in high school is actually protective because it helps teens learn how to drink responsibly before they go to college. There is actually absolutely no data that supports that. And in fact, there is plenty of national data that supports the opposite. We know that 9 out of 10 adults with a substance use disorder began using before they were 18. And for every year that a teen delays drinking, they are less likely to experience alcohol-related problems. Drinking at a young age, when their brains are still developing, has a tremendous impact on the function and structure of their brain. It is the last thing from protective. In fact, there was a national study where Dr. Teresi found that 20% of college students were involved in 50% of the disruptions on campus, such as ER visits and blackouts. So why do we care about the college students? Because the teens who reported that their parents allowed them to drink alcohol were 4 times more likely to report drinking heavily in college and to be a part of that 20% of the students that were having difficulties on campus. So where can we continue to move the needle? We want to look at the 3 Ps: perception, peers, and parents. Teens who believe that substance use is harmful and that their parents disapprove are less likely to use, right? Makes sense. So it's actually not helpful to give them permission to drink. In fact, at a time when we see the biggest spike in alcohol use between 11th and 12th grades, that's when we see that teens' perception of parents' disapproval goes down dramatically. And we seem to be making our family norms explicit during the middle school years, but it seems like we stopped talking about it as frequently in high school. Only 66% of high schoolers reported that parents gave clear rules discouraging alcohol use, compared to 82% of middle schoolers. So, question for everyone here is, given this, how can you as a parent and as a community member, how can you move the needle even more in the areas where you can? So we have spent most of our time so far talking about the risk and protective factors reported by our teens, right? So the part that we haven't actually talked about is the outcomes. And most importantly, what you see there is the fulcrum underneath the scale. Now, a person's genetic makeup determines where the fulcrum starts. It doesn't start out in the middle for everyone. It's the interplay between these external factors and the person's unique characteristics that's able to move the fulcrum. So, and epigenetics tells us that a gene's expression can be turned on or off based on their exposure to different things in the environment. So this is why looking at the risk and protective factors for every single teen is important. Because in order to modify the environment and give kids the best chance to thrive, we need to think about how do we help move that fulcrum as well. We can't just think about, how do we increase the protective factors and decrease the risk factors. We want to give every single teen a chance to thrive, including having a positive sense of self and good mental health. Which leads us to our next myth, that it's normal for teens to be stressed, and that it's really only a small handful of teens who are really struggling. Our data shows that there are hundreds of Darien teens and tweens who are really struggling with mental health issues. Now, that's not to say that all stress is bad, right? We don't want to take away all stress, because an appropriate amount of stress is how we learn and we grow. But there's a difference between stress and distress. So you've probably read all about the child mental health epidemic and how the rates of depression and anxiety have skyrocketed during the pandemic. The reality is we had a serious child mental health problem before the pandemic. In 2023, 1 out of 4 Darien high schoolers reported persistent sadness and hopelessness in the past year. We see that even in our youngest students surveyed. They were also less likely to report feeling safe at school or in the community, feeling connected to an adult or a peer, and more likely to have thoughts of self-harm. Now we see in towns around us, like Greenwich, Norwalk, and Stratford, they have similar depression rates. Fairfield actually has rates that are more in line with the data from the 2021 Youth Risk Behavior Survey conducted by the CDC and the Department of Public Health, where 36% of teens in Connecticut and 42% of teens nationwide reported signs of depression. Now, we could say, great, we're lower than the national average, but it still means that a quarter of our kids are really struggling. And when we look more closely at the depression rates, we see that female students are more likely to report depression compared to males, and that teens who are non-binary or chose the something else or not sure options were significantly more likely to report signs of depression. And the same held true for multiracial and Latinx teens in Darien. Now, we saw higher rates of anxiety in our Darien teens, with more than 1 in 4 high schoolers reporting persistent anxiety in the past year, with the 11th graders reporting the highest rates. Now, we can hypothesize that much of that anxiety is caused by college entrance exams and trying to get into the right school and making these decisions that feel like they are essentially determining the rest of your life trajectory. But let's not forget about our middle schoolers, where almost a quarter of them are reporting persistent anxiety at an extremely young age. So as was the case 2 years ago, female students reported both higher levels of sadness and anxiety when compared to male students, particularly among our 10th through 12th graders. They were also more likely to report restricted eating, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and higher levels of stress. On the other hand, they were also more likely to report both negative outcomes of social media use, such as feeling left out, but also reported social media use as a means of staying connected with their peers. They also reported higher rates of commitments in the community, like volunteering. Male teens, on the other hand, reported lower levels of anxiety and depression and reported better self-esteem. However, they were also more likely to report negative consequences as a result of gaming, such as not completing homework, not getting enough sleep, being exposed to things that they shouldn't be. They were also more likely to report that they had bullied someone. Now, you know how at the beginning of the talk we emphasized some of the community-level protective factors that are present in Darien, and I made note that this is not necessarily every teen's experience. Now, teens who identified as being part of the LGBTQ+ community reported significantly more risk factors when compared to other teens. 34% of them reported being bullied at school, compared to 14% of non-LGBTQ+ youth. "35% felt connected to a peer, compared to 66% of non-LGBTQ youth. 68% felt safe at school, compared to 87% of non-LGBTQ+ youth. And 57% felt valued and appreciated, compared to 86% of non-LGBTQ youth. Now, when we think about all the risk factors that are piled on the scale of a teen who is part of the LGBTQ+ community, I think we need to consider how we can be more intentional about supporting every single child in our community. And here's some more sobering news. 388 teens surveyed said that they felt so sad or hopeless that they stopped doing their usual activities. Over 450 of them said that they were so anxious that they couldn't function the way that they used to. 163 teens shared that they had seriously considered dying by suicide, with many of them actually making a plan, and 46 saying that they had attempted. Now, look around you in this community room. You could seat 171 people here. We could practically fill this community room with a number of teens who reported having seriously considered suicide. 2/3 of this room could be filled with youth who reported making a plan. Now, for a lot of people, you might think, there is no way that these numbers are correct. But make no mistake about it. We're really in the middle of a child mental health crisis. The 2021 Youth Risk Survey, Behavior Survey conducted by the CDC and DPH showed that 14% of Connecticut high schoolers considered suicide and 10% attempted suicide. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among young people ages 15 to 24. Now, Darien's rates don't approach the national or even the state average. But we can't turn away from the fact that there's a lot of work to be done to pull together as a community to support every teen who lives here. Now, I know that when I first saw that data, it was hard to to think about, like, okay, so what do we do? It was hard to even think, let alone plan. But this is the reason why it's important to ask these questions. And even more important, to think about and realize that our children will know that we're listening and that we're acting, but we're not reacting. In a moment, you're going to hear how Thriving Youth Darien and the school district is going to use this information to support our teens and tweens. But this is the moment to pause and reflect. It's understandable to ask, what are the mental health professionals doing about this? What is the school doing about this? I would suggest that there is a different way of thinking about it. The question is, what do people need from me? What do my kids and my kids' friends need from me as the trusted adult in the community? What does the school staff need from me so that they can do what they do best, which is to nurture scholars? And what do other community members need from me to make sure that we're organizing a coordinated response? I think this is the best way of being able to listen to our children and respond, but not react. So here are some things that you can do starting tonight as both a parent and as a trusted adult. Talk to your kids about substance use because they're listening. Set those rules early on and know that it's not a one and done kind of conversation. Double down on those conversations as they get older. There are lots of strength and protective factors in Darien, for sure, but there's also a lot of teens who are really struggling and where those protective factors do not apply. LGBTQ+, Latinx, and multiracial teens report much higher risk factors, more rates of depression and anxiety. We also have teens that are in so much emotional pain that they're seriously considering suicide. So don't be afraid to ask your teen if they're depressed or so sad that it's hard to function, and if they want to talk to someone. Don't leave them alone with those feelings, and trust your instinct as a parent. There's also a lot that you can do to show your support. You are all of the town's secret weapon, not just for your teen, but for your teen's friends. Gathering this data every year is really only the first step. So what we want to know is, what do you want to target for change? What do you need to feel prepared for that next step? What do you want to target? What do you want to learn more about? So we've included the QR code so that you can let us know, because we're listening as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgette. So you all are hearing this data for the first time tonight. A number of us have been looking at it for a couple of months now and figuring out what we wanted to do next. And that's one of the primary things that Thriving Youth Darien does do. We plan parent programming that to help equip you and to help guide you in helping your kids and their friends with these challenges. So toward that end, there is some planning that has started for programming this fall. On October 24th, Devorah Heitner will be here with speaking on her book, Growing Up in Public, basically sort of helping your kids grow up in a digital age when every aspect of their lives can be shared online, is happening online. So we hope you will save that date and join us for that. And that is in partnership with a number of our youth-serving community organizations and members of the Thriving Youth Coalition. And then, other than planning programming ourselves as a coalition, the other thing that we do with this data is share it out in the community. It's public, it's fully available to all of you, but also to all of the organizations who are at the table of Thriving Youth. And they all serve youth in different ways. And so they take this data and can use it for planning of their own programming. So toward that end, a couple of programs that are coming up. We saw the data point that an overwhelming number of kids who drink reported that they drink to have fun. So Thriving Youth Darien has supported the pilot of a program at the depot, Free Fridays, which is designed to give kids free, unstructured, fun time on Friday night, and that's specifically directed at high schoolers. And food seems to be the magic bullet with that. So there are some amazing vendors lined up, and the first one happened a couple of weeks ago and was just hugely successful and more than sort of I think anybody anticipated for a first event. There's another coming up tomorrow night. And then the depot is also partnering with Lighthouse, which is an organization affiliated with Kids in Crisis, supporting LGBTQ plus youth. And so they are having a youth group at the depot to support those kids. And then Darien will be hosting its inaugural Hope Day. This is an event that happens in a lot of places across the country, and is around sort of breaking the stigma of mental illness. And so that's a partnership of the town of Darien, the Mental Health Task Force, the depot, and Thriving Youth Darien, and a number of our partner organizations in town who are involved in this space will also be there to support that. So that's some of the very early planning that we've done to respond to this data, and what we kind of do as a coalition next is our programming committee will get together, and with further input that we hear back from you all, and that we hear from students as we continue to talk with them, we will be developing programming for the remainder of the year and beyond. So then, if you would like to see more of the survey data and access to resources that prior programs we have offered, many of them are on the Thriving Youth Darien website. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and that QR code will help get you there. And so now we are going to turn to the panel discussion. So if our panelists would like to come up. So tonight we have Dr. Alicia Dadd, who is the Director of Mental Health for Darien Public Schools, leading the effort to support the mental health and social and emotional needs of Darien students and staff. She previously coordinated training and consultation services to over 100 school-based mental health teams in 35 districts in Westchester, and worked for 13 years as a school psychologist. Dr. Dadd has also worked in residential programs, in mental health and educational research, and in therapeutic foster care. So we're very glad that she is here. We have Rebecca Campbell, a psychotherapist and director of therapy services at the Sasko River Center. She's a licensed clinical social worker with extensive experience working in private practice and the school setting. She's been practicing as a psychotherapist for 12 years, and which has afforded her considerable range of experience with her population of focus: children, adolescents, young adults, families, and parents. Prior to Sasko River, Rebecca worked as school social worker at Wilton High School, as well as the Fairfield Public School System, while practicing privately for the current Connecticut Neuropsychology Group. And Rebecca is also our vice chair of Thriving Youth Darien. And then we have John Hamilton, whom many of you know as well. John is the president and CEO of Liberation Programs and brings 3 decades of experience to his role. He's nationally recognized as an expert in the field of addiction treatment and prevention. He chairs the advisory board for Connecticut Department of Mental Health Addiction Services and serves on the Governor's Alcohol and Drug Policy Council. John is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a licensed alcohol and drug counselor. So thank you all for being with us. So we have one question, as I mentioned, that we're going to pose to each panelist and give them a chance to respond. And then we're going to open this up for your questions. So why don't we just go in the direction that you're seated, and we'll start with Alicia. The data we've seen tonight is striking. In some senses, positively so, and in some very concerning ways. If you were to give parents one takeaway from the evening, what would it be?
So I really appreciate being here, and I think there is a lot of information to unpack. I'm mindful about speaking in the microphone, so I'll be doing that. So I think one of the more striking things was when Georgette was talking about that fulcrum, and where we really think about risk factors and increasing kind of the more resilient factors. And one of those things that really struck me was when students responded that the people they were most likely to talk to were family members like grandparents or parents of other friends. And then beyond that, it was also a school counselor, a teacher, community leaders. I think the reason why that hit me so much was it really reinforces how important it is that we have collaborative relationships from parents to educators to school and community services. I think the more touch points that we have for our kids, the more opportunity they have to have some of these challenging discussions. It may be on a field and there's a coach and something hits someone. So I was really taken by how impactful it can be when we work cohesively and together, and also being mindful of how, as a school, we can help support parents in having difficult conversations. I know Georgette touched upon this, and I think sometimes there's a fear that doesn't play out in the research, that if we ask difficult questions, we're implanting ideas in our kids' mind. There's no research to show that. Ask the questions. And if you need the tools and not sure how to do it, try. And we're here to help you with that, whether that's a counselor, school psychologist. We are here if you need that help. I think wherever they can have those conversations and have that support, we see those numbers go up. And I'm particularly mindful about our LGBTQ community and knowing how much of an impact that you all as parents can have not only on your own kids, but someone else's child. Sometimes students who are within that group don't necessarily feel comfortable expressing themselves to their own parent. But the more that we can facilitate non-judgmental conversations, it is tough to be a teenager. It is tough to be the parent of a teenager. So I think the more that we can non-judgmentally keep those lines of communication open with our own kids, with other kids, with the school district, we have a tremendous amount of support in schools. I want to mention that 2 days ago, the DHSPA had a wonderful panel of all the staff available to students. It included counselors, it included our new Teen Talk counselor, it included Judy from our Wellness Center, administrators. There are so many touch points, and the more we can work with you guys to encourage our kids to reach out. Who is your point person? How can we help you find that? But I really was just struck with how much there is a need for us to come together as a community to support all of our children. And I love Georgette's question to everyone in terms of what can I do? So if it's difficulty having those conversations, I'm running a series of workshops for parents. Dates are in progress in terms of scheduling. That's like parenting in the 21st century. How to create space to have conversations, how to have difficult conversations, how to regulate your own emotions as a parent to be effective. So I think the same way our kids need tools, we also need tools to facilitate that, and there is no judgment in that. There's no playbook on how to raise kids in a time of social media and post-pandemic. And the more we have that trust and that opportunity to have those conversations, I think we'll see the positive trends in these numbers continue to grow.
Thank you. Rebecca.
Hi, I'm really glad to be here, and thank you, Georgette, for that great presentation. Georgette was mentioning listening and asking and not reacting. So if I was going before Dr. Dad, I was going to tell everybody to take a deep breath because we just heard a lot of heavy information. And I think to Dr. Dad's point, being mindful of where your kids are right now, getting those open lines of communication going, and being mindful of where they're at is considering where they are developmentally, meaning they're at this really funky place where there's going to be some separation, regression, testing limits. And I know to the point of listening and asking and not reacting, we are all very capable parents, I'm sure, in this room. And acting and taking action is something that we're going to want to react off of when we're anxious. And to know that your reacting can actually look like being mindful of your child in the context of their development and where they are in the world, as we're pointing out with the social media, being 24/7 exposed to all kinds of stimulus, messaging, and knowing too that if you want your child to listen to you, they're going to need to know that you trust them and that you're going to be open to listening to them. If you are concerned about the statistics that we saw and you want them to understand your messaging around substance use, around how to practice self-care, they're going to have to trust that you are willing to pause and understand that their opinions and their thoughts might be different than you. Some parents will say, like, well, when I grew up, I never spoke to my parents that way. Or when I grew up, I was outside playing all the time. And when our kids are just growing up in a very different world. And I do think that when we're flooded with the pressures of our society in this county specifically, I think we want to react and take action and sit down and have these conversations. But I ask you to be mindful of where your kids are and how they're growing up and the 24/7 pressures they're under. And last spring, I was here for a presentation that the Darien teens gave so beautifully about some of the 4 things that they wish adults would know. I don't remember all of them specifically, but one was that we could trust them to make mistakes. So that also looks like pulling back a little bit, trying not to be the snowplow parent, trying not to react and clear the field for them. And it's scary. It's really hard to be a parent of a teenager. And to also, I think it's wonderful you're going to offer resources for parents on self-regulation as well, because, put on your oxygen mask first. And so I think allowing us to make mistakes is what they said, and to trust us and to not expect us to be perfect and let us be kids and have some fun. So in order to do that, I think you want to know your child, be curious about them, and understand where they are growing up today versus, where we might have grown up. Thank you.
Well, it's easy to follow my colleagues because I agree with everything they say. And my takeaway message is very similar, which is do whatever it takes to stay connected with your kids, which means meet them where they are. Which sounds a little trite, but it's a lot harder than you think. Meeting a child where they are is really having that lens of humility that you have no idea what it means, as my colleague said, in the point of being a high school student in Darien High School as a junior in 2023. So you don't know. So pay attention. If you meet your child where they are, you'll always walk away with new understanding, love, and compassion. If you walk away with anything else, it's time to get some consultation with some of your other colleagues here, your other parents, your partner, somebody else, another trusted adult. But recognize that means you have an expectation of where you think your child should be versus where they are. So meeting your child where they're at is about being able to accept them for who they are and not who you want them to be. And if you meet them where they are, they'll walk away feeling heard, understood, believed in, and loved. We talk about that safe adult in the person's life. Why not be that person in your child's life? They have this phenomenal study, the ACEs study, that talks about all horrific things that have happened to kids, that whether it's been trauma or abuse or neglect, and they answer these 10 questions, and it actually predicts substance use, or predicts mental health issues, or predicts early death. But the one protective factor that transcends all 10 questions, if a person can even say 10 yes to 10 questions of horrific abuse in their life, is if they've had one consistent, reliable, supportive adult in their life. So The challenge for tonight is be that person in your kid's life. Don't, it's wonderful that the coach can be the extra person, or the counselor, or the licensed social worker, or the teacher, but, it really starts, the community is the healer, and the first level of the community is family. So if kids don't feel like they're loved in family, they're going to be working overtime to feel that love outside. And I always say that the greatest gift a father can give to his children is to love their mother, and the greatest gift a mother can give their children is to love their father, because this is where kids will learn intimacy. If they don't learn intimacy between partners, they're going to chemically simulate intimacy with substance use, right? That's where the kids lose hope. And kids will be exposed to substances, to alcohol and drugs. The biggest factor is whether or not they're doing it to feel good, which could be still dangerous, and tragedy can happen even with first use. But if they're doing it to feel better, to self-medicate underlying anxiety, not being comfortable in their own skin, that's where the kids really get into trouble. So increased exposure to alcohol and substances increases risk, increased availability increases risk, but the increased availability to toxic stress and trauma are the gateway drugs. That's what people don't understand. Everybody talks about marijuana being the gateway drug to other drugs. That's nonsense. It's trauma, it's stress, it's unregulated stress. So as adults, we need to be able to role model for our kids self-regulation and mood regulation, and be a role model for the way we live our lives and our relationship with alcohol. Because, by the way, some of this data, there's some studies that you don't want to hear, which basically that the alcohol use in a community with kids is usually parallel to the alcohol use or misuse of the adults in that community. Shouldn't be a surprise. I don't see anybody needing to write that one down, but something to consider. And then again, if you really want to get into the granular of like what is social drinking? Social drinking for men is less than 3 drinks in any setting, but less than 14 drinks in a week. And for women, it's less than 2 drinks or less in any given setting for less than 10 drinks. If you do the math, that means you can't have 2 drinks for more than 5 days, or if a guy 3 drinks for more than 4 days. If you stay within those parameters, you have less than 1 in 100 chance of having a problem with alcohol, even with genetics to play. But if you break the daily limits, it goes to 1 in 5, and if you break the weekly and daily limits, now your chances increase to 50%. And again, it's a message that we've said in Darien before, try to push back that age of onset. We know so much about brain development now that the earlier the kid gets exposed to alcohol, the greater risk that child is going to have that part of the brain be hardwired in their neuroplasticity for that being their only reward system. So we've got to give them other reward systems and give them a sense of hope of living a life and learn how to self-regulate, find other reward systems so they don't have to start drinking at an early age. If they start drinking at 14, 40% chance of having a problem with alcohol, irregardless of genetic predisposition. But if you push back to 16, that cuts in half. 16 to 18 cuts in half again. 18 to 21, it cuts the chances in half again. And if the child drinks at the legal age in 50 states, at age 21, there's only a 7% chance that they'll have a problem with alcohol in their lifetime. Why isn't it 1%? Why? Because the brain isn't actually fully developed for 24 for women, for 25 for men, for some men like 40 or something. I don't know, Frank, we're not judging here, right? Some men never, but that's the point, is you just don't want to expose a vulnerable brain early on, and you want to lead by example. And you want to also give your kids the message that they can talk to you about anything. I say that and you're like, well, of course they know that. Well, go home and really be challenged and ask your kid, hey, how am I doing as your dad? How am I doing as your mom? What am I doing that's standing in the way of you being honest with me? And what can I do differently to give you the message that there's nothing you can say or do that's going to have me love you any differently? Your kids will be blown away because they're not so sure that that love is unconditional. So go home and just reassure them that that's the case, and that'll be the best protective factor. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. What questions do you all have? Yeah. So we know that there are some pieces around the mechanics of survey administration where the part of the day in which it's administered, seniors are off. Some seniors are kind of in other places, and so there is that is consistently sort of a lower response rate for that reason. Whether there are others, I don't know. But we do know, and so that's something to look at for kind of how we administer the survey in future years, kind of what part of the school day, that kind of thing, that would certainly help that somewhat.
That's a great observation, actually, because I did notice that it's like 2/3 by 10th grade, 2/3 11th grade, but one participant short of 50% for 12th graders. So then you got to wonder, my first conclusion was, whoa, some of the seniors that didn't, you probably can extrapolate that would be 50% of kids using it in senior year, because maybe those 50% of kids that actually listen to the adults in their life are the ones that probably aren't drinking. So there may be a higher percentage, we don't know, of those other kids that just didn't want to do the survey, and those are the kids that maybe don't listen to adults as much, but that would be a concern.
Yeah, it is. Would you like to?
Yeah, an observation that I don't have clinical data on, but we've been observing it in our clinic and just in consulting with other colleagues, is the impact, and again, there are positive impacts of social media on, people youth that identify as male and female, but we are seeing an uptick in eating disorders, especially in youth that identify as female, and a lot of what we're hearing is that does come from social media, and again, the studies haven't been conclusive about the actual impact of social media on youth, but we've kind of theorized that maybe that has something to do with the fact that youth that identify as female might be more vulnerable to what they see, and those feelings of depression and self-concept being lower, and popularity, and all the kinds of factors that can contribute to a teen these days feeling anxious and depressed. And again, this is just anecdotal, but that's what we're kind of finding and talking about it. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment.
I had the same thought with the gambling, and I think when you look at it, I think gambling and social media rely on the same type of reinforcement. It's intermittent reinforcement. It is adrenaline seeking, it is immediate, and is very addictive. So I think, and in adolescent brains that are still forming, that prefrontal cortex to say maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't, is not there yet. It's growing. It'll get there by 25. But I think it's that when you look at social media, you don't know if you're going to get a like, if you're going to get something positive, and so it draws you in. The same is true with gambling, right? Like you might get this short high when you see I did well, or it's actually even more addictive than if you consistently got something positive. So I think it's the same mechanism, and I think they coincide, right? Because social media connects with a lot of gambling advertising, and I think when we talk with our kids, it's being mindful of when I am on a device, when I am gambling, what are my emotions in the moment, and do I end up feeling worse or better by the time I put my phone down? And honestly, I think most kids will acknowledge, I actually don't, I either feel I'm ambivalent or I feel worse, and yet that pull, that biological drive for intermittent reinforcement is so strong that they continue to do it. Same is true for adults to a lesser degree too.
And there are trends in gambling with gender too, right? So you've got the boys who generally do the gaming. For adults, with men and women, it's generally more of the gaming activities and the games like the roulette and all are driven for men for the excitement and the rush, versus women generally are drawn more towards that which is numbing, such as like the one-armed bandits. So something that's going to be numbing is going to be what somebody's going after. So it's just something. And then just for the boys, like, who maybe not feeling so depressed and all, maybe that's like the sense of what Daniel Offer and some researchers have shown early on, that boys are generally more alexithymic. They wouldn't know an emotion if it bit them in the arm. And maybe that serves them during this unsafe world because they're too clueless to realize what's going on. Overgeneralization, I know, but the point is that disconnect with their feelings could serve them to a certain degree, until it doesn't, because it's not a great thing to have. But I do think you start to see some of those trends, like boys have less of a vocabulary of articulating feelings at an early age even, and then being able to identify that.
So I can say, and I'd like others to speak to this too, that was one of the data points that really surprised me, that we actually saw reported marijuana use down sort of a year into legalization in this data, which wasn't what I expected. But I've also heard in in sort of the people I talk to all day, every day, that all of the anecdotal evidence is to the contrary. So it's a little bit of a mystery, and I'm interested in what you all are seeing.
Nationally, alcohol trends have trended down since 1997 from the household studies and the large studies of 40,000, students across the country. They peaked in like 1997 at 8th or 12th graders at 68% or something really high versus now even what's alarming is 50% of the Darien. But that's still, if we did the study back in 1997, it would have been significantly higher. I was actually surprised that the vaping was down because anecdotally the students I work with and, that I've seen in my private practice, they report, quite like hyperbole. Everybody's vaping and everybody's still vaping. So that really did surprise me to not have those numbers reflected. But if you look at the household studies, it does reflect that has gone down. And I know there's been a lot of there's been a lot of restrictions and regulations, and Jules went down for the fall and all that. So there has been sometimes this that restriction of access does make a difference. But I was surprised that it was as low as it reflected on this study.
Yeah.
And I do want to point out that this classic book now called Chasing the Screen by Johan Hari, and his walk-away message about what it works in addiction is that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And it has to be connection for the whole community. And so there is a direct correlation with this community not feeling connected to the community at large, and their disconnection to their, to others. They're disconnected to their feelings, disconnected to the community at large.
Any thoughts from?
First of all, I appreciate you highlighting that because there is a real significant difference that we have to look at and ask more questions. I think one of the things that we're doing, even when before this had come out, and hopefully you all will complete it, we're looking at doing a school climate survey this year that really focuses at getting at more information about safety, security, connectedness that will be filled out also by parents, by educators, and by students, because I think the first thing is it highlights that we need to do more, we need to find out more. So taking into consideration some of the considerations that came out of the DEI work last year, one of them was the school climate survey to further assess, because I think there is more that definitely needs to be done, and really figuring out where are we falling short? What is the experience of those kids, and what can we do as a community? And I think that's the first step. I think there's work to be done, but I think that's a starting point. DEI? Yeah.
Georgette, do you have any, just in terms of national trends and what we're seeing here, and can you remind us, how our data kind of stacked up?
Yeah, so the trends that we see are actually not unique to Darien. So we know that nationally, BIPOC youth and LGBTQ plus youth are disproportionately affected and have worse outcomes in terms of mental health. I think part of it is if we think about what is sort of the current climate in terms of, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen here, right, in Darien. But when you turn on the news and you see that there are states that are criminalizing LGBTQ and trans efforts, where you see other states where certain words cannot even be talked about, I think it doesn't necessarily mean that as a community that's happening, but it means that if you are bombarded every single time that you turn on the TV, turn on your phone, go out into the world, that something about you does not fit in, we can understand why the risk factors just end up piling up, right? And why then they're more likely to have a bad outcome. So I think as a community, we can think about how can we be different, right? How do we counteract every other message that they get, right? And how can we be, and again, a teen only needs one person to feel like they are going to care that they got up that morning, right? So while we can think about systemic issues, think about the fact that they just need one person. That could be you, right? So I think that that's important to remember, that this feels like a really big insurmountable problem, but they really only need one person.
I think also it can be something that your family system can be mindful about, like maybe you as a family attend the local Pride Day, or when something is on the news, you bring it up and you model for your kids that we care about the rights of all youth, all people. We're aware of this as a family, making it comfortable to talk about hard things and issues, and similarly giving your youth the space to be able to express their opinion so you can hear them and reframe. And there's a phrase, you understand them, they're gonna be more likely to hear what you have to say and entertain that as a possibility.
Thank you.
One of the things that I work with families with is if they have a hard time getting their kids in because their kids don't want to ask for help, you be the patient. And it's real. You say, because you do have the problem, listen, I need you to come in and see somebody with me because I feel like I'm failing as your mom. I feel like I'm not connecting. I feel like I'm not giving you the messages that I'm listening to you, believing in you, that I can help you. I feel powerless and I need some help, but I need you to be able to help me help you because you're the expert in your own life. That generally works because now the person's not coming in. If there's any stigma or pathology, they're coming in to help you. But again, it's based on the strength of your relationship. I always tell parents, tailor your message based on your relationship with your kid, what you can get away with, right? And then you can even correct if they know you're coming from a place of love, and make that message very individualized for how they know you.
I know, there is more community work happening in Darien around sort of equipping non-clinicians, just every human being, to be able to identify these sorts of signs and symptoms and that kind of thing. Ali Ramstek at Town Hall has been offering mental health first aid trainings. There's something I'm forgetting to. Okay, there is a mental health first aid training coming right up. November 8th and 9th. So there's also something called QPR training, question, persuade, refer, which is being offered at the community level. So there are, and that, a lot of that is happening through the town mental health task force. But Ali Ramstek at Human Services sort of has all that information, and I'll give you this flyer. Thank you. Thank you. Would anyone like to?
Yeah, I would just want to echo that idea of being authentic, and I do think our greatest gift to our kids is showing our own vulnerability. The more you show your humanness, the more you're lovable. Go home tonight and tell those kids exactly that. Your kids, hey, I went to this presentation, looked at the survey, that was presented in Darien, and it scared the hell out of me. I feel so powerless. I didn't know that there was so much drinking going on. There was so much depression, suicidality. That terrifies me. Now you're having an authentic conversation with your kid that might give you the reassurance, don't worry, I would come to you if there was an issue. I got this, it's not that bad, or whatever, but you're starting that conversation. I always tell people the same thing, family meal. Everybody says, oh, family meals are a protective factor, and I remember a family coming in one time with this kid who had his hand impaled by his brother during the family meal. So kind of assumes everybody gets along and is connected and, has that bond. But I say that only because like at the next family meal, don't say, hey, how was lacrosse today? Or how was field hockey? Oh, fine, Mom, fine, Dad. Say, hey, let me tell you about what an ass I made of myself at work today. I was doing this presentation and I leaned back and I fell right back on my butt. Everybody laughed. It was so embarrassing. I couldn't believe it. Then your daughter and son are more likely to say, well, you should have seen what happened to me in gym class last Thursday. Now you're having an authentic conversation. Take the lead. Share your vulnerability. Unfortunately, your kids see you pretty successful here in this community in Darien. They don't know you were like a bonehead in high school too, and you made mistakes and did stupid, embarrassing, humiliating things. Share those stories. That'll bring you closer to your kids because it's going to bring more authentic conversations because that's what they're going through. They see you like, in the sense of perfection or sometimes like, wow, never had the issues we had, that you suffered too. And be able to let them know that you've had days when you didn't have confidence in yourself and you felt shame or you felt embarrassment. It'll just bring you closer, bring you, that first level of connection is the family. So, certainly take a positive risk. It's definitely worth it.
And then you might say that at the dinner table, and they might look at you and be like, okay, cool. So like my kids might say that, but I will say if you share with them what you found out tonight, or you share a story and you're like, oh, I guess I just don't care, and it's very humbling, they're listening to you, and they might not want to talk about it right now or at the dinner table, because we also don't know what kind of day they've had. We have no idea what kind of days our kids have, because they're just long and all these things that we've talked about. But don't be afraid to float it out there, and you may come back to it. You may get them in the car when you're driving to school and they may bring it up. But that's really valuable, and also it's okay if they don't want to talk about it, what you want to talk about right now, because they're hearing you.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for being here, for being vulnerable, because I think it does take everyone, whether or not you have kids, to have that wake-up call and say, what are we doing? What is a community? What is this society are we imparting on our kids? It's very scary. And then another point that you mentioned, when you think about some of the treatments around individuals who struggle with suicidal thoughts, there's acceptance and commitment therapy, and there's dialectical behavior therapy. And the way you build commitment is by asking that question, what are your life worth living goals? Because when we think about that fulcrum, if we can think and have a commitment to our long-term goals, that helps us realize that right now what I'm going through is not permanent. I still have goals, and it keeps that kid alive for a week, for 6 weeks, and then it gets a little better, and then a little bit better. So other questions to ask your kids, not what's your goal for this year, what are your life worth living goals? What are things that are gonna make you feel fulfilled and joyous and be able to tolerate those challenges? So you're absolutely right. Finding purpose and allowing space for your kids to figure out what that means. Oftentimes I hear from young people, I'm going through the motions because this is what I'm supposed to do, right? Whereas what is it that feeds your soul? What are your life worth living goals? So having those conversations, I think, are so important, and thank you.
I would say, first, don't put pressure on finding the purpose, because part of this task developmentally is to try things out and to not feel pressure to do something because they want to belong someplace, or just because everybody else is doing it, or because my parent told me to do it. I would say, to answer your question directly, be open to what they're curious about. So exposure to activities and clubs, or mentioning or storytelling about things that you might have done to help find the purpose, and support it. And if it's something that sounds like something that you wouldn't sign up for, or might not get them to the place where you want them to be, you still need to honor it and be curious with them about it, because it's so individual, and their purpose might change. They might be into one thing in 9th grade, something else in 11th, and completely switch gears as they're going off to college. And purpose can be, like, self-concept is made up of all different kinds of things. So they can have a purpose as an athlete, as a student, as a volunteer, as an older sibling, all kinds of different, it's a large umbrella, but that's just what I would recommend.
Yeah.
I think too, clarifying like values versus goals. Kids hear a lot about goals, whereas if you ask them what are your values, like I really enjoy being in relationships, then you can kind of filter in the experiences. I really enjoy achieving things. Okay, then let's look at what aligns with that. We don't often talk about values with our kids, but the values are the things that today drive us as adults. So the more you can have those conversations, I think sometimes we're such a goal-driven society that we forget to ask about the values that underlie our actions.
So we're at 8:35. If people need to leave, that's fine. There are 2 more questions that I've seen, so I'll take those, and then we'll finish. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, and in 3rd grade, they'll probably take a hard stance against marijuana because they just don't know. So in 3rd grade, what you want to teach them is mood regulation, self-regulation, and how to play well with kids, because social competence is going to be one of their greatest resiliency skills. Learn how to have empathy, connect to others' feelings, problem-solving skills, a sense of responsibility, and then a sense of purpose in life. But that said, we know, and we have to be able to give messaging to kids that doesn't insult their experience or their intelligence. So you have to meet kids where they are, so that is different. You know, tailoring a message to a kid who's not drinking or doing drugs is also good to check in, because all choices have consequences. And don't assume your kid's doing great because they're not smoking, you know, on weekends and drinking at parties. maybe they're not going to parties. And the problem is that their friends, best friends from preschool now have cut them off from any connection because they're not in their group. And so there's a sense of loss. So honor that loss and stay with the fact that all their choices have consequences, but give reasonable messaging. We know, again, that vulnerability to the brain, anything you put in your brain while it's still developing, increases risk for having a problem with that substance later. I had mentioned that marijuana is not a gateway drug because there's more people at, the way they present it, that it doesn't mean it's going to lead into other drugs, but it's stress. That's the gateway. It's why you're doing the marijuana, the vaping, the nicotine, the alcohol. It doesn't even matter the substance. It's the purpose, the motive in which you're using it for. If you're using it to mood regulate and to feel better because of underlying depression, not being comfortable in your own skin, trauma, stress, anxiety, you're screwed. Clinically speaking. We didn't even talk about the pills that have fentanyl in it. So as much as I try to say, try not to give a scared straight message, one pill could kill. And so there's that balance of letting kids know that they could have a tainted pill of benzodiazepine or an Adderall that they think is Adderall tainted with fentanyl, and they could die with one use. But again, if they haven't had that experience, it's going to insult them.
I think that's a great question. I think one of my primary purposes in this role is professional development and being in-house to provide professional development. My background and training is in dialectical behavior therapy, which is the most well-researched, evidence-based intervention for suicidal adolescents. So, for example, I'm training additional staff, a 4-day training in the coming weeks. By December, new staff will be trained. I'm also working closely with the high school administration, the elementary administration to do more things in faculty meetings. I've had open office hours, professional consultation, and I'm consistently saying when I'm at those faculty meetings, truth is, it's hard. Professional development time is limited, and there's so many things as a school district. I wish we could have more and more professional development. So I've done a survey, and most people said that the most effective professional development for them is either in small group or consultation. So I got that data at the end of last year. So I've really kind of encouraged having more consultation directly to staff. And I have to say, people have reached out, and I've encouraged them to, all the way from, our paraprofessionals up to administration, asking those tough questions. And when we say, ask the tough questions, the same is true for staff, for parents. Pick up the phone, send an email, ask the tough questions. So I think that's a continued plan for professional development, and partnering with, a lot of our staff has done the mental health first aid. Any resource that we have available, communicating that out is another focus. Yeah, I wasn't here for the I came to the district after, but I'm sure there's history with selection of questions.
So yeah, there are a couple of things. We worked very closely with clinicians, with the school staff around what the exact content, wording, very detailed look at kind of from highly trained people around what was appropriate there for certain ages. The other piece is that when the parents saw the content of the survey involved skip logic. So if kids answered no to certain questions, they didn't see everything that came after. And when the parents saw the survey, it was just the PDF of the whole survey. So it is the case that there were things there that if the child had not said, yes, I've had thoughts of self-harm, that they would then go on and see that whole list. So that was another piece where it's important when we present the next version to the parent community that we need to be really clear about that sort of thing. So we do need to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for being here, for your time and attention and really thoughtful comments, and to our panel and Georgia.
One more thing, I will be remiss in not saying it. I mentioned the panel discussion the other day, the DHSPA. It was recorded, and it was a series of questions, many of which you guys have just asked, answered by a panel of 12 high school staff. So it will be up on the website under DHS counseling, so you can hear directly from school staff.